Warning: the content of these videos contains adult themes which may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. Everything you're about to hear is taken from court documents, trial transcripts, and various media sources. A 26-year-old mystery. A doting mother and her two beautiful young boys attacked in the dead of night. A story of unimaginable tragedy, the murder of two precious boys compounded by their innocent mother railroaded by police and sentenced to death. I take you beyond the headlines and inside the case files in the courtroom of the Routier murders. I will present and analyse the evidence and facts of the case like you have never seen them before. A failed investigation, a contaminated crime scene, fabricated evidence, junk science, character assassination, prosecutorial misconduct, and a killer roaming free. With a live episode and special guests close to the case and close to Darlie, join me as we delve into the mystery, dying for justice, the wrongful conviction of Darlie Routier. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Rich Prater, podcaster and private investigator, and his partner Bonnie, who are close friends with Darlie and myself. Please see the link for his podcast on the case. Kathy Ramsey, who is a close friend of Darlie's mother and babysitter to Darlie Lynn. And finally, Amy Donnell, nurse with over 15 years of experience in the sector, for all their support and invaluable information they've provided me along the way. This series is in loving memory of the late Rowlett Routier, an amazing woman, mother, grandmother, and fierce advocate and supporter of her daughter-in-law Darlie Lynn. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Mystery Maverick. Today we visit the capital city of capital punishment, Texas, USA. We travel back to June 6, 1996 to the suburban town of Rowlett and the mysterious murders of Devon and Damon Routier. Born January 4th, 1970, Darlie Lynn Peck was the firstborn to Larry and Darlie Peck. The young couple had been married only a year, and as a member of the Naval Construction Battalion, Larry had been given the news while he was on duty in Vietnam. By all accounts, Larry was so thrilled by this news he jumped onto a bulldozer and carved Darlie's name into the face of a mountain. Darlie was said to be a daddy's girl, and she was the apple of his eye. Larry is reported to have played over a dozen instruments, and he bestowed his love of music onto the young Darlie Lynn. Darlie, like most little girls, loved dolls, babies, and playing with her friends. She also enjoyed Sunday school and would regularly take the bus to the local Baptist church. However, marriage wasn't easy for Darlie's parents, and after 7 years of a tumultuous relationship, Mama Darlie and Larry would divorce. Not long after, Darlie's mother would meet and marry her second husband, Dennis Stoll, and move to Lubbock, Texas for a new life. In 1978, Darlie Stoll would give birth to her second child, Dana, and 2 years later, a third daughter arrived whom they named Donnell. Initially, Darlie had remained in Pennsylvania with her father and extended family, but not long after, Darlie would move to Lubbock to join her mother and siblings. Kathy Ramsey, a close friend of Mama Darlie and babysitter to Darlie, describes the young Darlie as a gentle and sensitive young lady. Kathy recalls an interaction with Darlie, who had become very concerned regarding a wheelbarrow full of maggots, as she was worried they might die out in the hot sun. Kathy had to gently explain to Darlie that they would be fine, there were maggots and they would soon turn into flies and go on their way. As she got older, Darlie is said to have become fiercely independent, and at 16 years old, Darlie already had her first job at McDonald's. Her mother remembers her being keen to show her independence from a young age. Mama Darlie describes the young Darlie as an extremely responsible teenager, even in situations where other teenagers would break the rules. She recalls a time when she allowed Darlie to have a party when she was out of town, and when she had returned, everything had been in its place and the house and kids were in order. Darlie Stoll had been working at the Western Sizzlin Steakhouse since 1983 as a waitress. Her manager was a young, ambitious and handsome young man called Darlie Routier, who had quickly worked his way up in the company. By all accounts, she had mentioned to the young man that she had a very beautiful 15-year-old daughter named Darlie Lynn that he should meet. The young man was already dating a smart Texas co-ed 4 years his senior at the time. Why would he be interested in some kid? Darren, 2 years older than Darlie, was 17 years old at the time when Darlie had first visited the restaurant on Mother's Day of 1985. Darlie was exactly as her mother described, stunning, and the young man had fallen head over heels for her in an instant. Born on New Year's Day 1968, Darren Routier was the first child born to Cyrilda and Leonard Routier, who had married young and had Darren just after Cyrilda's high school graduation. They would go on to have 2 more children, Dion in 1970, and 5 years later the family would welcome a baby girl, Arinda Routier. The book Hush Little Babies described Darren like his father, a boy who was averse to confrontation, even though he possessed physical strength. This has further been echoed by people who knew Darren. Kathy Ramsey, who knows Darren firsthand, stated Darren wasn't the type of guy who would physically harm somebody. He was placid with a controlled temper. Not long after the pair met and started dating, the young ambitious Darren would be offered an amazing opportunity in Dallas, Texas at the Video Technology Institute and would spend every moment studying. The downside was he missed his family, but most of all, Darren was pining for Darlie Lynn. 17 years old and much to her family's dismay, Darlie moved to Dallas to start her adult life with Darren. It is reported that things were pretty rough at first. The apartment they were renting was infested with roaches and money was extremely tight. However, the young Darren was determined to make a success of himself and had a great mind for enterprise. His brother Dion said Darren was born to be an entrepreneur, and at the end of 1987 Darren would finally graduate. Armed with his new qualifications, he landed his first job at an electronics company called Qplex. Not long after, Darren would propose to Darlie on a ski trip to Purgatory, Colorado, popping the question on a romantic ride on a ski lift up a snowy summit. Darlie of course said yes and immediately began her search for her dream dress. The book Hush Little Babies details the hunt that ensued as Darlie had searched every outlet and sale to find the designer gown she had her sights set on, even dragging Cyrilda Routier along with her so she didn't miss the limited time sale. In the end, Darlie's dream dress, originally costing $1,650, was hers at $200, a mere fraction of the retail price. On August the 27th, 1988, Darlie and Darren would marry in a small intimate service in Darren's parents' sunroom. Only family and close friends would be invited. Darren would have his childhood friend as best man, and Darlie had Darren's co-worker Basha Javel as her maid of honour. To many this seemed a strange choice for Darlie's maid of honour, as it is reported that Javel was less than keen on the couple marrying and was envious of their lifestyle and outward success. A close friend had suggested to Darlie that maybe involving her in the wedding would distract her from sabotaging it. In the end, the wedding went ahead without a hitch. Not everyone was so cynical of the union, and many thought they were the perfect match. Dion's wife Dana recalls the couple clicking from the get-go and stated they were just silly in love. Cyrilda, who would later become a fierce defender and advocate for Darlie, had a close bond with her daughter-in-law, and she is reported to have been, quote, as pleased as Punch when the couple tied the knot. She later went on to say that Darlie allows Darren to love me and me to love Darren. There is no jealousy between us. She further recalled that Darlie was such a caring soul. She remembers the day a terribly upset Darlie brought an injured baby rabbit into her home with the intent of trying to save it. After calling the veterinarian, Darlie had been told not to waste her time, as the rabbit would inevitably die. However, Darlie was not going to accept it, and she hand-fed and cared for the small animal herself, and was heartbroken when a few weeks later it sadly died. After their honeymoon in Jamaica, they quickly settled into married life and started building a future. The young couple were now both working at Qplex, and Darlie was learning the ropes of pressing images onto circuit boards. They had dreamed of having a family and eventually acquired a mortgage on a small brick bungalow at 4016 Bond Street in the Westwood Estates area of Rowlett. Just 2 days later, after they moved in on June 14, 1989, Darlie would give birth to their first child, Devon, and the couple were overjoyed. Darlie was a natural mother, and the young Devon had the best of everything. In the meantime, still working at Qplex, Darren would start up a side business in the evenings, and he and Darlie would put together transistors for circuit boards which Darren would then resell. Soon the house would become their place of business, and Testnet, which the couple pronounced Technique, was born. Eventually, Darren moved the business into a small space in Rowlett close to the police station. He brought with him his co-worker Barbara Javel from Qplex to help him with the electronics while Darlie did the bookkeeping. The couple were making good money. They began to accumulate material possessions that were evident of their financial success. Darren was said to buy expensive items due to the quality and longevity, and Darlie, with her eye for quality but also for a bargain, would frequent the local yard sales, thrift shops and pawn shops in and around the Dallas area. Darlie and Cyrilda, both having a love for shopping, are said to leave the house at crack of dawn the day after Christmas to buy presents for the following year. On February the 19th, 1991, the Routiers welcomed their second son into the world, Damon. Like many women, after her second child, Darlie was unhappy with her body's appearance, and after some consultation decided to have breast enlargement surgery, and Darren was more than happy to pay for it. Darlie was always flamboyant in how she dressed, and with her bleach blonde voluminous locks and lots of gold jewellery, she commanded attention. She was young, beautiful and blessed, and she was not shy to show it off. She was no wallflower, and some of the neighbours reported she was known for turning up to yard sales in a bright pink thong bikini like it was nothing. The young Darlie was not short of admirers, and many report that she would turn heads as she walked in the room. On the flip side, this meant that she was not short of her detractors either. The couple decided they needed more space for their growing family and wanted a nice, safe neighbourhood for the boys to grow up in. In May of 1993, 2 years after the birth of Damon, the Routiers would secure a mortgage on a house in a brand new development in the Dorrock Heights area of Rowlett. 5801 Eagle Drive would become the new home of the Routier family. The young family of 4 were living the American dream, a thriving business, 2 happy, healthy children, and now a beautiful suburban home. Darlie got to work on the house, putting her extravagant stamp on it with a large stone fountain in the front yard and Waterford crystal adorning the dining room and a spa out back. Darren also loved the material possessions and trappings of success. He collected expensive sports memorabilia and bought himself a 1986 Jaguar that could go up to 160 miles per hour. To the outside world, the Routiers had to be living beyond their means, but the reality was that most of the material goods they owned were pre-owned or sell items. Furthermore, they had plans to expand on their income, with Darlie wanting to breed and sell expensive Persian cats, and Darren buying a 30-foot cabin cruiser that he planned to turn into a love boat and rent out on the nearby Lake Ray Hubbard. At the end of 1994, Darlie would fall pregnant with her third child, but would sadly suffer a miscarriage. A few months later, in 1995, Darlie would get the amazing news that she was pregnant again. The couple longed for a baby girl to round off their family, and they planned to name her Darlene. However, this was not meant to be, and on October the 28th, 1995, a baby boy they named Drake Routier would come into the world. After Drake was born, Darlie's hormones had been all over the place, and like a lot of new mothers, she had the baby blues. This led to suicidal thoughts, which Darlie documented in her personal diary in a letter to the boys. It is reported that Darlie had contemplated taking her own life with pain medication, as she had felt overwhelmed with these negative emotions. At that moment, Darlie would telephone Darren at work in a cry for help. Darren immediately left work and returned home to support and reassure his wife that he would help out more and that she had no reason to be thinking such thoughts. Darren would later testify that he didn't take Darlie's suicide attempt seriously because she hadn't taken any of the pills. He further stated that if he had thought it was serious, he would have gotten her help without hesitation. Darlie's menstrual cycle was in chaos at the time, and once that had finally returned, the Routier family went back to normal. Darlie, feeling better, had gone on to focus on losing her baby weight she had gained while pregnant. She is reported to have had a little help from a popular diet medication known as fen-phen, and the pounds were dropping off quickly until she was only 5 pounds off her pre-pregnancy weight of 125 pounds. Darren's business Testnet was growing due to a peak in the computer industry, and in the tax year of 1995 he had declared a gross income of $264,000 and had taken a salary of $100,000. The young family would take vacations to exotic locations such as the Caribbean and Mexico. The boys were dressed in designer clothes and had a room each decked out with the latest toys. They also had a games room filled with electronic gadgets, including a Nintendo and a karaoke machine that Darlie would hone her love of music and singing. The family were well liked by their neighbours and those who knew them. The young couple were generous too, buying Christmas presents for some friends' kids who had fallen on hard times. They even paid a neighbour's mortgage payment when he had been going through grueling cancer treatment. They would let their friend Basha Javel charge on their credit card and pay them back in instalments. Darlie even bought Basha's daughter and her friends gifts, and Basha recalls Darlie being a very giving person. The boys would get to do fun activities, and the Routiers were known for taking the kids and their friends in the neighbourhood to the local picture house on Saturday to the dollar movies. Darlie was always present with the boys and would attend to their every need. She would become the room mother, volunteering at Devon School, helping to make holiday decorations and getting involved in the children's crafts and activities. Darlie was not a fan of corporal punishment, and the boys were rarely, if ever, physically disciplined. Darlie and Darren took the boys everywhere with them, even including them in an anniversary weekend away in a plush hotel. To many, the boys were lucky and had a life some kids could only dream of, and some would even consider them spoiled or pampered. Boys would play outside in the neighbourhood and had lots of friends who would visit the Routier home regularly. In her mid-20s, Darlie was known in the neighbourhood as the fun parent. A close friend of Darlie and private investigator Rich Prater many years later interviewed one of the young boys who was a regular visitor at the home. The young boy, now a man, remembers those times with the boys and Darlie fondly. He stated that Darlie always had treats for them and that she would tell them to help themselves. He said he and the boys would pop off the screen on the garage window and take popsicles out of the freezer. Him and the other kids would affectionately refer to the home as the Nintendo house. This has further been echoed by friends of Darlie's who spent time with her and the boys. People who knew Darlie say the boys were everything to Darlie. They were her whole entire life. In an interview on the documentary Waiting for a Miracle, Melanie Waits, a close friend, said, "She's just a wonderful friend. She's a wonderful mother. We did things with our kids together, went over to each other's homes, went out to eat." On another interview for a recent documentary, The Last Defense, Darlie's friend Julie Clark said, "All the kids just wanted to come there. Darlie would have popsicles and goodies for them. She was just a real fun-loving, caring person." Even Darlie's arch nemesis Basha would later say under oath that Darlie loved children. She was kind to them all and encouraged the boys to have their friends over to the house. She further states that the boys were smart, well cared for, and well-adjusted, happy kids. "She was wonderful, she really was, and it's very lonely without her," said her sister Dana on the documentary The Wrong Man. Typical little boys of that age and era, they both loved Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles and anything that was new and popular, recalled their grandmother Darlie in an interview in the documentary Waiting for a Miracle. Devon was a ball of energy and is described as the kind of kid who was fearless. He would do backflips into the hot tub and was always trying to make people laugh and was a little showman. His outgoing and social nature meant he was a lot like Darlie, although he had the outward appearance of Darren. He was a real social butterfly and had lots of friends at school and around his local neighbourhood. Many described him as a leader to the point he would have many of the older kids following in his direction. On the other hand, Damon was the kind of kid that was scared of the dark and didn't like to be left alone. He was painfully shy and quiet, preferring to shadow his brother in social situations. Although he looked like Darlie in appearance, he very much had Darren's personality traits. He was averse to confrontation and rarely talked to people he didn't know. Having said that, he had Darlie's sensitive nature and would make sweet gestures to people he knew and loved. In the documentary Waiting for a Miracle, Mama Darlie recalls Damon wrapping up a slinky in Christmas paper that was all messy and giving it to her as a gift. She goes on to tearfully say she would give anything to have that kind of Christmas again. The day of June 5th started out much the same as any other for the Routier family. Darren's Jaguar had recently broken down and was in the repair shop. This meant that they only had the use of one vehicle, the family's Pathfinder, which Darren needed for work. This understandably frustrated Darlie, who was stuck at home with two energetic and boisterous children and a baby to entertain. School was out for Devon and the boys were used to going on different activities and outings. They were restless and, like many kids, they would test the boundaries out of boredom. There was plenty for the Routiers to appreciate and look forward to though, and the car situation was only temporary. Darren and Darlie were soon approaching their 10th wedding anniversary and the couple had decided to renew their wedding vows and had involved the boys with the preparation and planning for the special day. Darlie's sister Dana was also planning a wedding and Darlie had thrown herself into helping her with the preparations. Darlie had found a sale that was selling dresses for $200 and as a contribution to her sister's wedding, she not only bought her own dress, but she had purchased one for Dana too. Dana remembers the boys being super excited about the upcoming events and specifically had requested to have silly string spray, which for obvious reasons was denied. Besides, it was soon to be young Devon's 7th birthday, a much more suitable arena for balloons, streamers and silly string. The decorations and presents were already arranged and paid for, and the invitations were sent out to the popular little boys' neighbourhood and school friends. Darlie had an upcoming trip planned with a girlfriend to Cancun, and Darren had already paid on his American Express card for a family vacation they were taking to see relatives in Pennsylvania. Business had been slowing since the beginning of the year, and with Darlie spending more time at home, Darren had Basha's school-aged daughter Tammy helping out with the accounts receivable. According to Basha's later testimony, Darlie and Darren were fighting a lot during this time as there was no physical cash and there were bills to pay. Anyone who knows the world of business knows that it would not be unusual to have periods when cash flow is low. Although Darren's personal account was low, his business account had $8,000 in it, and a further $20,000 was due in the accounts receivable. Basha, although involved in many of the business conversations, was not accustomed to the everyday run-ins of the business accounts of the Routiers or their personal finances. She further had her own gripes with the Routiers. She believed that Darlie shopped too much, and it was due to this reason why money was short. She herself was upset that the money was not being at the time put back into the business and spoke to Darren about buying new equipment. Many suggest that Basha was envious of Darlie. She viewed herself as Darren's equal in the business and believed that she should get the same pay as him. Due to the current car situation and noticing his wife's frustrations, on June the 5th, Darren arranged for a lift to work and back from Basha. This meant that Darlie could run errands and get the boys out of the house. It further served as a means for Barbara to chauffeur her mother Helena to and from the Routier home. A recent Polish immigrant to the United States, she had recently been hired by the couple to do laundry, helped Darlie out around the house. By all accounts, this was a short and contentious union, as like her daughter, Helena was not particularly fond of Darlie. I didn't like the way she talked, dressed or acted, and what she deemed as Darlie's laid-back attitude to parenting. According to Helena, she did not see the boys until around lunchtime when the hungry pair came inside for food. She recalls after lunch Darlie saying to the boys, either go play upstairs or outside. In her later testimony, she had arrived at the Routier home around 8:20 a.m. on June the 4th for her first shift and was less than thrilled to return the next day. She stated she had felt uncomfortable and that she felt as if Darlie and a local neighbourhood girl were making fun of her behind her back. Nevertheless, on June the 5th, 1996, at around the same time, Helena returned to the Routier home in what she said was for the sake of her daughter. Basha would pick Darren and Dana up and they would head off to Testneck for a day's work. Darlie was home with the boys sorting through some paperwork she had received regarding the life insurance policies Darren had renewed and increased earlier in April, and helping Helena with the housework. Helena later testified that there was only a small amount of washing left to do that day, so she had vacuumed the entire downstairs of the home before placing the vacuum cleaner in between the wine rack and the pantry. Basha had dropped off Darren and Dana at around 5:15 p.m. and gone inside to help herself to a beer. She recalls sensing some tension between her mother and Darlie and that she hurried out quickly. She records that she waved to Darren and Dana, and as she pulled away approaching the corner of Linda Vista, a black car with tinted windows had passed by them really fast, which had made her mother upset. Basha later testified that her mother had told her about a dark car acting suspiciously in the alleyway behind the Routier home on June the 4th, and that she believed the occupant was looking inside the Routier garage. A neighbour of the Routier family, who lived directly across the street from Darlie, remembers seeing a black car acting suspiciously around the Routier home on the afternoon of June the 5th, 1996. She said she had previously seen it around a week before the murders too, and the occupant was looking directly towards the Routier home. She stated on the day of the murders around 12:30 to 1 in the afternoon, she saw the same car slowly going past the Routier home. Darlie's sister Dana had stayed for dinner that night of chicken noodle soup. Dana, a smoker, had been smoking cigarettes out in the garage in a dedicated area through a large back window, the same ones the boys used to grab popsicles from the freezer. Darren went and fixed the back gate as it had been getting stuck and the family's Pomeranian dog could escape through the small gap. Once the gate had been fixed, Darren recalls playing with the boys on the living room floor while Darlie cooked. After dinner around 9:30 p.m, Darren gave Dana a lift home, some 15 minutes round trip from the Routier home. Dana later said she hadn't stayed that night as she had wanted to go home to her fiancé, who would be concerned of her whereabouts, a decision that would later haunt the young lady with guilt, who remembers kissing her nephews goodbye and telling them she loved them for the last time before heading home. Upon his return, Darren states that Darlie was already dressed in her oversized Victoria's Secret's nightshirt and a pair of panties watching TV with baby Drake asleep on her stomach. It was summer in Texas, and due to extremely hot weather and the summer break commencing, the boys had asked excitedly to camp out on the floor next to Darlie. Darren said the baby was restless, so he made him a bottle, taking him from Darlie and feeding him while watching the news upstairs before laying the infant down in his crib. Darren and Darlie had exchanged some tense words that night over the money situation and the cost of owning the cabin cruiser that was proving to be more of a liability than the investment that they once thought. They talked until around midnight, and Darren checked on Drake, retrieving a blanket and pillow for Darlie, before going to sleep himself. In the early morning hours of June 6, 1996, the peaceful silence of Eagle Drive would be broken with a frantic and terrifying call to 911. The confused and panicked Darlie told the shocked dispatcher that her and her boys had been stabbed by a stranger as they slept. She wept that her babies were dying and begged for the dispatcher to send help, constantly inquiring when they would get there. Darlie would be on the phone to emergency services for 5 minutes and 44 seconds. At one point, you can hear her talking to Damon, willing him to be strong and to hold on. Not far from the scene, parked outside the Victory Baptist Church, an on-duty Rowlett police officer, David Waddle, was nodding off in his patrol car when he heard the dispatch through the fire station on his radio. In later court testimony, Waddle would testify that after hearing the fire brigade tones on his radio, he checked the fire brigade channel and heard an alert for a stabbing at 5801 Eagle Drive. He says he then rushed to the Routier address without telling dispatch he was responding to the alert. The officer claimed that as he approached the Routier home, he was approached by a person he later identified as Darren Routier running across the front lawn. He says he drew his weapon and asked the man what was happening before following him inside the home. Darren denies he ever left the house until after police and paramedics arrived, when he went to get Karen Neal. This is further supported by the 911 call, in which Darren can be heard the entire time. Darren recollects the chaos that ensued as he woke that night. He says he heard a glass break in the distance as if it was far away. Shortly after, Darren remembers hearing Darlie going ballistic, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Devon, Devon, Devon." He remembers thinking that the glass coffee table must have fallen on Devon and caused a serious accident. As he reached the family room where Devon was, Darren said he saw the glass tabletop was completely knocked off the base and he was lying on the floor. In that moment, Darren thought his fears had come true. Little did he know at that point that his worst fears and even nightmares were yet to be realised. Next, Darren recalls patting Devon on the face to try and rouse him before realising his son had 2 large gashes in his chest. Darren would attempt CPR on Devon, but blood would spurt out of the young boy's chest. Meanwhile, Darlie was going back and forth to the kitchen sink to get towels and running them in between both boys. Darren testified that at one point Darlie was helping him with Devon, trying to hold his wounds together and exclaiming, "Oh my God, is he dead?" Officer Waddell was the first to arrive at the scene 3 minutes and 44 seconds into the 911 call. According to Darren, he just froze in shock upon entering the family room, and that they were all in complete shock at that point. He asked Darlie what happened, to which she frantically explained she awoke to a man walking away from her and he went out through the garage area. The second officer to arrive almost 5 minutes into the call was Lieutenant Matthew Wallin of the Rowlett Police Department. He said he asked Waddell to relay to him what had happened before taking him into the kitchen and out into the garage to look for the suspect and clear the house for the paramedics, who were anxiously waiting outside for a further 3 minutes. EMT Jack Colby remembers walking into the hallway area where he went straight to Damon, who was lying on his front, fully dressed with blood covering the back of his light blue jeans. He states that as he rolled the boy over, Damon had gasped his last breath and he saw the lights go out in his eyes. He picked him up and carried him to the ambulance, where they would try CPR on the boy for a further 15 minutes. Before rushing him to the Baylor University Hospital. He later testified that he and his colleagues had never experienced anything like this before, and it was really difficult to process the events of that night. Feeling completely helpless and not knowing what to do, Darren would run across the street to the neighbour's house, Karen Neal, who was a registered nurse. Karen later testified about her involvement that night as a frantic and tearful Darren pounded on her front door in the early hours. She stated that her son and husband rushed to the Routier home before being stopped by the police. Darren and Terry Neal, Karen's husband, would tell the police that she was a nurse and to let her through. Meanwhile, Kobe's partner Brian Koshak would go to check on Devon, who he recalls had a scared look on his face. Koshak would later say that he immediately knew Devon was gone and there was, quote, no signs of life at all. Devon Rush Routier, just 6 years old, with his whole life ahead of him, was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. Koshak then went over to tend to Darlie, who had been stabbed in the arm through to the bone and a long gash across her throat. He recalls approaching a pale, injured and upset Darlie, saying, "Who would do this to my babies?" He said he took Darlie out on the porch and began to cover her wounds to stem the bleeding. He recalls another EMT, Larry Byford, removing Darlie's white nightshirt, which at this point was mostly red from all the blood she had lost. He further stated that he inserted an IV to counteract the effects of extreme blood loss before handing her over to the care of Larry Byford for transportation to the hospital. By this time, Karen Neal had managed to make her way past Darlie and inside the Routier home to be confronted by a horrifying scene. She remembers seeing Devon laying on his back, partly covered by a blanket. It was far too late for her to help the boys, but she set about finding other ways to help. It is reported that Karen not only removed the family dog from the home, but was entrusted with the care of baby Drake, who was upstairs in his crib and unharmed at the time of the crime. Byford later testified that he helped Koshak on the porch, covering Darlie's wounds, and he hadn't noticed the thin necklace still around Darlie's neck. He claims that as he cut away Darlie's nightshirt, he noticed the necklace was under the bandage, but as he tried to remove it, that Darlie had grimaced in pain. So he left it under the bandage until they reached the hospital. He recalls placing Darlie onto a stretcher and ferrying her to the ambulance, where he and his colleagues would check her vital signs. He stated that Darlie was lucid and able to answer his questions about her medications and allergies, and that he remembers her relaying to him that she had given CPR to one of the boys. He said that Darlie was anxious to get to hospital and was asking him when will we get there and how much longer. Darren said that Darlie didn't think she was going to make it, and recalls that as she was placed on the gurney, she said to him, "I want you to promise me that you'll find out who did this and take care of it." Jack Colby, having reached the hospital, turned Damon over to the hospital staff, who further tried to save the little boy's life. A short time later, 5-year-old Damon Christian Routier was also pronounced dead on arrival, although it was likely he had died at the scene. Darren later described the shock and disbelief of that night on the documentary The Wrong Man. "I didn't know what to do. I mean, you're just freaking, you're trying to do everything that you can, trying to logically think about what just happened, and all you can do is just sit there on the curb and watch your whole life just be gone." Mama Darlie recalls receiving the terrible news from the Routier's neighbour Karen Neal in the early morning phone call. She said that as she awoke and picked up the phone, Karen was just screaming down the phone telling her Devon and Damon are dead and Darlie might be dying. In utter shock and disbelief, Mama Darlie would make the long drive to Rowlett. Having arrived at the hospital, Darlie was immediately rushed into emergency care, and after some exploratory exam on her deep neck wound, the nurses had noted a possible arterial bleed and rushed her to surgery. An emergency room nurse, Jodie Phipps, recalls hearing her screaming and crying when she was brought in, asking, "Why would they kill my boys? Why would they kill my kids?" Trauma surgeon Dr. Alejandro Santos notes that all the small blood vessels in Darlie's neck were damaged and they had to be cauterized to stop the bleeding. He further goes on to state that the wound on Darlie's neck had come within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery, meaning had the knife gone in just 2 millimeters more, Darlie would likely have bled to death within a matter of seconds. Mama Darlie remembers a doctor taking her hand and saying her daughter was lucky to be alive. Darlie's family remember being at Darlie's bedside in hospital after she had aroused from the anaesthetic after surgery. Her sister Danelle recalls Darlie being groggy from the surgery and she just wanted to touch the boy's picture and just cry and cry, and she's just asking, "Why God, why my boys?" Darlie's injuries were extensive. Not only had she been slashed on the neck, she had a wound on her right forearm that extended all the way to the bone, along with several minor cuts and wounds to her face, chin and right breast. Her arms were covered from her hands up to her armpit in angry red bruises. This woman was clearly a victim of vicious and prolonged attempt on her life. Karen Neal, Darlie's good friend and neighbour, would bring Drake to see his mother at the hospital. She would later testify that Darlie was desperate to hold her son despite her significant injuries, and Darlie was, in her experience, presenting as a grieving mother and a victim of trauma. The nurse's focus notes further documented Darlie's disposition immediately following surgery and the boy's death. One nurse documented that Darlie was tearful, crying, very emotional, with periods of angry sobbing throughout her whole entire 7-hour shift. Meanwhile, police and investigators had descended on the Routier home. The once beautiful home, filled with the noise of kids playing and having fun, was now the crime scene of a brutal double homicide and attempted murder. On the next episode, we look at the aftermath of the boys' murders and the media frenzy that ensued. We will open up the case files of the Routier murders, the initial crime scene investigation, the police interviews and subsequent arrest, as we continue to delve into the mystery, dying for justice, the wrongful conviction of Darlie Routier.